Hello there, and welcome back to Bible Break. And we haven't yet finished the story of Lot. We've come to the end of Sodom and Gomorrah, but Lot and his daughters, as it turned out, escaped, and we've got to finish chapter 19. So it's a short reading. It's Genesis chapter 19, and we're going to read from verse 30 down to the end of the chapter, which is verse 38. But then there's another short reading that we have to do at the end of this, which we find at the end of the story of Noah. Because we might be tempted to see this little story of Lot and his daughters as being nothing but a weird sort of postscript to the main event, the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. But this story, plus the other story which I've just mentioned, which we're going to touch upon, they've got an importance all of their own, which if rightly understood, is something worth thinking about. So, Genesis chapter 19, verse 30, that's where we're going to start. And I'm reading from my NIV as usual. Lot and his two daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his two daughters lived in a cave. You remember that the angels, last time around, had told him to head straight to the mountains, but he didn't think he'd make it. And that was why he'd sort of stopped and settled in this little village of Zoar. Verse 31. One day the older daughter said to the younger daughter, "Our father is old, and there is no man around here to lie with us, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then lie with him and preserve our family line through our father." That night they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went in and lay with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. The next day, the older daughter said to the younger, "Last night I lay with my father. Let's get him to drink wine again tonight, and you go in and lie with him so we can preserve our family line through our father." So they got their father to drink wine that night also, and the younger daughter went and lay with him. Again, he was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. So they really did preserve their father's line. The older daughter had a son, and she named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. The younger daughter also had a son, and she named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites of today. So, those last couple of verses, the consequences of what happened here endure down to this day. Now, like I say, we may think that this is just a weird postscript, but we might also obviously have real difficulty thinking about this these incestuous liaisons which Lot's daughters had with himself. Their intention, in traditional terms, to keep it in the family and to preserve their father's line may have been quite honourable in itself, but I don't think the story was told for that reason, but for reasons which we'll come on to. In terms of keeping it within the family, you'll notice in the following chapter 20 that Sarah is actually Abraham's half-sister. I just recall to you that we are in the book of Genesis here, the book of origins, and the degeneration which we normally associate with incestuous relationships and intermarriage within a family. It may well, I'm sure it didn't apply at the outset, because how on earth would there have been an outset and a start to the human race? No, this is something which has developed and develops over the course of time. But as to the actual sort of point and purpose of this story, we'll come back to that in a minute. I think to understand what's going on here, I have to remind you of a previous reading, a previous postscript in a sense, where we read about the sons of Noah in Genesis chapter 9. And following the flood, so Noah and his family survive the flood. But then what happens? Well, we'll read from chapter 9, verse 20 of Genesis, chapter 9, verse 20, and this is what we read again, just another very short reading. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk. So you notice how drunkenness and debauchery are sort of figure in both these stories. So he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Then Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backward and covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father's nakedness. Like I say, whether there's any sexual innuendo there or not, we can't be totally sure. But it doesn't matter in terms of the story, or in terms of what we're reading. We'll get to the point in a minute. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend the territory of Japheth, and Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his slave." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Altogether, Noah lived 950 years, and then he died. So we're talking here about the marginalization of Shem, because obviously there's no... if there was anything actually sexual which went on apart from Ham making fun of his father, then nothing could come of it, because we're talking about men here. But the consequence of this is that Noah curses Canaan, the son of Ham, the one who's responsible for this little episode, and his descendants. Now, taking these two stories together, in some ways what we're doing today is a bit of a revision, but there's a development in this story here. Because the Canaanites, and then within that group, the Moabites and the Ammonites, who were these people? Who were these tribes, if you like? Well, in the history that follows from this story of the origins, they become the sworn enemies of the Israelites themselves. And as I mentioned to you when we saw this in Noah, the end of the story of Noah there, and as we're seeing here, it's a lot easier to despise, have aggressive feelings towards a people. It's easier to fight them, go to war against them, if the story that you've been told your nation's propaganda is that these people are despicable, or just look where they've come from. Look at that dodgy business with Noah. And, in any case, Canaan was the fruit of a curse. The man was cursed. Everybody who came from him was cursed. Oh, look at the Moabites and the Ammonites. Well, we all know what happened with Lot and his daughters after the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. They kind of carried on as though they were still in Sodom and Gomorrah. And look what came of that. And, these people, the lowest of the low. So we get an inflated sense, don't we, through this, of our own superiority and of their inferiority. And we just feel as if we've got to sort of trample them down, and we've just got to, we can't have anything to do with them other than fight them and do what we like with them. If they're our slaves, if they're as low as that. So you see and the point is, this is quite open. This is here in the Bible. There is a counterbalance to it, of course, as I probably mentioned earlier as well, in that God told his people that they would be judged all the more severely if they imitated the nations around them. And in the book of Ruth, we see that there's a Moabite lady who becomes the great-great-grandmother, or whatever it was, of the great King David, King of Israel. We see again, for example, the prophet Jonah not wanting to preach to the people of Nineveh precisely because he despises them as an alien race. But that when God makes him go there, pretty much, the people listen to him avidly, they take heed to his words, they repent, and they turn to God. So there is this counterbalance, there is this dialogue, if you like, going on within Scripture about what is or should be, already in the Old Testament I'm talking about, already what is or should be Israel's role in the world, and Israel's role can only be fulfilled in terms of what should be Israel's relationship to the peoples and the nations around them. And, ultimately, it's not so much a question of going to war against them all and fighting them all, as if they're in any position to do that by the time the great empires arise. But it's more a question of, thanks to the work of the prophets, look inside yourselves. Think about how far you have fallen. Think of what's wrong with you and your people in your country, and what you need to do to get back to God and get on the right track. So that's really the point and the purpose of these stories, the propaganda that's here, and then the counter propaganda, which is all there in the Bible. Because, as I keep saying, you might be surprised to hear me talk like this about there being such a thing as propaganda in the Bible, but the Bible is about life, and it is about the history of a people, and it is about a people who have to learn about God and learn about his ways and learn from their mistakes. And note well that I am not saying here, of course, for 1 second that the Canaanites, the Moabites, the Ammonites were angels. There was obviously far more, even I would say, than a grain of truth in what was said about them and the way that they themselves carried on. But to really develop the myth of how awful these people are, and to really set your people against them so that out of your position of supposed superiority, you can beat them down. Propaganda serves its purpose. Serves its purpose well. And we just need to be aware of that and aware of these things, and aware that, once again, these issues continue to this day. If great crimes have been committed in your own country, well, one of the ways that you might get your people to stop thinking about that or not get onto that or not, pursue that matter any further, is if you can take their minds off things with a war elsewhere. I'll leave you with that. And we'll have a look at Abram and King Abimelech next time around. See you then.